Matera, southern Italy, and the crew of No Time to Die, Daniel Craig's fifth and final outing as James Bond, are shooting the movie's thrilling opening.
We refer to this as Donut Square. It's where Bond gets cornered by a bunch of villains. They attack him, and then it's Bond's turn.
See, it's 360 degrees of carnage. He's surrounded, and this is Bond getting out of a sticky situation. You know, it's just going to be a great moment.
The film's pre-title sequence represents the beginning of the end for Craig as he prepares to bow out with a bang as cinema's greatest ever secret agent. And it's perhaps fitting that he's doing so with the assistance of one of the most iconic elements of the entire 007 franchise. No Time to Die is the culmination of a partnership between the companies behind both Bond and the Aston Martin DB5 that spans 7 decades, with a collective history that stretches back over a century. Though only featured on screen in 8 of the 25 official James Bond films since its first appearance in 1964's Goldfinger, it has become every bit as synonymous with the style of the character as his perfectly tailored suits and his signature cocktail. But how did 007 turn the Aston Martin DB5 into the most famous car in the world? And how did the DB5 come to help define the effortlessly cool aesthetic of the most popular series of films in the entire history of cinema?
You're not thinking that.
I sure am, boy. Ever heard of Evel Knievel?
Looking back over almost 60 years and a quarter century of big screen adventures, James Bond has driven pretty much everything on 4 wheels.
Lean over.
Or 2. Or 3. Or 6. Or even 18. Actually, better make that 9. They've ranged from the utterly sublime to the moderately ridiculous. But when it comes to getting out of a scrape, whatever the vehicle, nobody does it better behind the wheel than 007.
What is it with you and moving vehicles?
They've always been a huge part of all Bond films.
I mean, it's just not a Bond movie without cars and car chases.
Bond has always understood that cars are inherently dangerous, especially when they're driven very, very fast.
He's obviously got the choice of all vehicles. It could be tanks, it could be planes, it could be rockets. But what cars do, they make it one-on-one, and that's what the appeal is, I think, and that's what intrinsically links Bond to cars.
Just 2 films into the franchise, he traded in his vintage 3.5-litre Bentley for something a little more sporty. And a partnership was born between Bond and Aston Martin that has lasted ever since. Despite flirting with various models from the legendary British manufacturer over the years,
a few optional extras installed.
There's really only one car that you think of when you think of Bond.
You'll be using this Aston Martin DB5 with modifications.
If you took all the cars that have been in the Bond movies over the years and you line them all up, the one car that most people could pick out of that lineup is the Aston Martin DB5. It's so instantly recognisable as a Bond car.
You can't separate the DB5 from James Bond. They are synonymous. They're one and the same. And I think that's where the romance started. For every car lover, every Bond lover, you love one, you love the other.
There's a number of things that James Bond cannot do without. That may be the martini, that may be the perfectly fitting tuxedo. And one of those things is the Aston Martin. Without that, James Bond would not be able to fulfill his role as the suave secret agent that everyone wants to see on screen.
But the relationship between 007 and the DB5 and the collaboration between Aston Martin and Eon Productions, the makers of the Bond films, almost never happened.
You're joking.
The story of how they came together and the cinematic history they created isn't necessarily the stuff of a blockbusting all-action big-screen spy thriller, but it probably involves just as many car chases.
I grew up in India, 5,500 miles away from England, but certainly as a kid growing up, when you thought of British things, you thought of the Queen, you thought of tea and shortbread biscuits, and James Bond. I go with Formula One around the world. We get to travel to over 20 countries a year with the Grand Prix. And when we go to places like China or Japan and countries like that, unquestionably, the fan base there links Britain with Aston Martin and James Bond.
The Aston Martin story actually starts with a cyclist rather than a motorist. Lionel Martin, through his interest in racing bikes, got into amateur motor racing. He decided to set up a company with a guy called Robert Bamford.
They set their heart really on building the finest sports car that they could possibly make. And really, Lionel Martin's vision was to establish the brand by breaking world records, entering racing events at home and abroad, and also racing in Grand Prix. But we were a tiny little outfit of enthusiasts helping Lionel Martin, and Kate Martin, his wife, was a driver, part of the team as well. And it was everybody getting stuck in, burning the midnight oil to improve the cars and get them ready for the next event.
During the Second World War, Aston Martin made Spitfire parts, and then it wasn't until after the war, in 1947, when the company changed its hands, and a guy called David Brown buys it, as in DB, as in DB5.
He transformed it from a very low-volume car maker into one of the premier luxury and sports car makers of the world.
And during those same post-war years that saw a transformation of the manufacturer's fortunes, a former naval officer turned journalist set about creating a character and a series of novels that would change the spy genre forever.
Ian Fleming, by the time of his death, was the most read author in the world, yet he turned to writing really just as a diversion. Ian had been a journalist, and just prior to the Second World War, he covered a trade trip to Moscow for the Times, and he gleaned this amazing information that he turned over to the Foreign Office. On the back of that information, he was then brought in to work with the Admiralty. He didn't go out on active service, but he did work in London overseeing lots of Secret Service operations, helping guide operatives as they did their clandestine work. And when he sat down to write his first novel, he obviously chose a subject matter he knew about. He'd grown up with money and he'd enjoyed the finer things in life. And when he wrote his first novel, he gave Bond those aspects of his own personality.
Fleming's real knack, aside from just being able to tell really exciting stories, was to paint a picture of a completely unattainable life and a man whose existence was out of the realms of everybody that read it. The locations, the attitude, the bravery is something that, us mere mortals can only aspire to.
Casino Royale, Fleming's debut James Bond novel, was an instant hit in the UK when it was published in March of 1953 and led to a best-selling series, released annually, and all written at his holiday home Goldeneye on the north coast of Jamaica. At the same time, Aston Martin's pedigree as a racing team was growing.
Well, the wonderful thing back then was, of course, if you were selling sports cars, you automatically went racing.
Racing has always really been at the heart of what they do, and still is at the heart of what they do today.
It was a given that you would head to Le Mans because that's a great way of showing speed, endurance. It was smart of them to find the budget somehow and go to Le Mans. Even smarter to win it.
Aston Martin entered every Le Mans race since 1928. David Brown had his eyes set on that race, and it was in 1959 when it finally happened. And suddenly you had an Aston Martin 1-2 at Le Mans after decades of trying. That was the race that made the mark in sports car racing.
Their prestigious first and second finish at Le Mans in June 1959 came just 3 months after the publication of Ian Fleming's 7th James Bond novel. But Goldfinger and Bond's connection with Aston Martin would have to wait until the third film in the newly minted cinematic franchise. Instead, producing partners Albert Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman chose Fleming's previous 007 novel, Dr. No, after the rights to their first choice, Thunderball, became embroiled in a decades-long legal dispute.
It's not until you go back and read the novels as a film fan you realise actually how different Bond is as a man, and also things that we take for granted from Bond films, like the styling, the music, the gadgets, the cars, everything. It was pretty much born out of the film. The style all came from the film. So they had incredible vision in seeing what they could take Fleming's pretty aggressive and almost archaic Bond and put a bit of a tongue in a cheek and turn it into this franchise that we all kind of fell in love with pretty much immediately.
I admire your courage, Miss...
Trench. Sylvia Trench. I admire your luck, Mr.
Bond. James Bond.
A lot of people talk about the Bond movies as cycles, and so you get with Dr. No, you start with something quite grounded. That was partially because they only had $1 million to play with, so they couldn't do very much that was elaborate.
How did it happen? I think they were on their way to a funeral.
But also because you get this pattern of Dr. No, and then From Russia with Love is also quite austere.
From Russia with Love had the benefit of coming off the back of the success of Dr. No, so they already knew that it worked. People loved Sean Connery as Bond, and they doubled its budget to an amazing $2 million.
Red wine with fish. Well, that should have told me something.
You may know the right wines. The other one on your knees. How does it feel, old man?
When you have had a huge hit in Dr. No and a huger hit in From Russia with Love, suddenly they're a little bit more emboldened. The budgets are a little bit bigger, their ambitions are a little bit bigger, and the scope, as a result, can be a little bit bigger as well.
They then had the confidence of success to really then nail exactly what the franchise was going to be moving forward.
With a debut that launched 007 onto the big screen and a follow-up that allowed him to flex his muscles, it would be the third film in the series that brought the whole package together, setting a template that encapsulated everything the audience would come to expect from a Bond film.
Look, he's gunning for trouble. The world's wiliest, toughest gentleman agent with a license to kill. 007. It spells Bond. He's the idol of every woman. Sean Connery in Ian Fleming's Goldfinger.
When the third big-screen 007 adventure, Goldfinger, was released in 1964, it exploded, almost literally, onto cinema screens all around the world. While the previous two films had introduced Bond elements that would last for decades, not least the look and feel of the central character, it was the third that built on the success of Dr. No and From Russia with Love, with producers Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman evolving a formula that has come to define the entire series.
007 seems to have the situation well in hand.
As a result, Goldfinger became the Bond movie, against which all others would be measured.
Dr. No and From Russia with Love had set the groundwork and laid the foundations for so many things in the Bond series that have become iconic. By the time they got to Goldfinger, they'd really crystallised that into something very special.
I think my earliest memory is probably watching Goldfinger with my parents.
Looking back, my first experience of Bond probably is actually Goldfinger.
That's probably the earliest memory I have of watching a Bond movie.
Those are the moments that stick in your mind, the iconic moments, you know, lady covered in gold.
That's a really stunning image.
The wetsuit reveal. Odd Job.
That's just such a brilliant moment.
Goldfinger himself.
Obviously.
The laser.
He has that wonderful moment, obviously, with James Bond.
Do you expect me to talk? No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die.
It had absolutely everything, and that's even before you get onto the car.
The on-screen connection between James Bond and his legendary car goes all the way back to Ian Fleming's original Goldfinger novel. In the book, 007 is given a choice from the MI6 pool, either a Jaguar 3.4 or an Aston Martin DB Mark III. On both page and screen, Bond ended up behind the wheel of an Aston.
Brilliant.
The movie would make the connection between man and machine seem completely effortless. Behind the scenes, for the making of Goldfinger, it wasn't quite so easy.
Initially, the conversation between Aston Martin and Eon was actually one of us being quite reserved.
They phoned Aston Martin. They thought, we've got this brilliant idea. We're going to turn your car, your latest car, into this gadget-packed thing. People are going to love it. It's going to be huge. And Aston Martin said, no. The production designer, Ken Adam, was a really big fan. He convinced Broccoli and Saltzman that it had to be an Aston Martin. They went back to Aston Martin. Aston Martin said no again. So Ken Adam and the special effects supervisor, John Steers, went down to Aston Martin and did a presentation, basically talked them around until Aston Martin gave in and said, look, we'll give you a couple of cars, we'll loan them to you for this film if you will just basically just leave us alone. And you know, that's turned into like a 50-year partnership. But at the start, Aston Martin wanted nothing to do with it.
One of the best scenes in Goldfinger with the DB5 for me is the moment that Bond is introduced to it by Q.
Where's my Bentley?
Oh, it's had its day, I'm afraid.
But it's never let me down.
M's orders, 007. You'll be using this Aston Martin DB5 with modifications. Now, pay attention, please. Windscreen bulletproof, as are the side and the rear windows. Revolving number plates, naturally.
Saltzman and Broccoli were very intelligent men, and they realised that it would be great to have an introduction to the car and for Q to show some of the gadgetry.
You see this arm here? Now open the top, and inside are your defense mechanism controls. Smoke screen, oil slick, rear bulletproof screen, and left and right front wing machine guns.
Guy Hamilton, who is the director of Goldfinger, told Desmond Llewellyn that Q should hold Bond in utter contempt, whereas Llewellyn's normal instinct was that Bond is Bond and he saved the world routinely and he looks like Sean Connery, so you would be awestruck just by him walking into the room. And Hamilton said, no, this guy breaks everything you give him, treats it with utter disdain, so do the same to him.
Ingenious and useful too. Allow a man to stop off for a quick one en route.
It has not been perfected out of years of patient research entirely for that purpose, 007.
So you have this lovely relationship between the headmaster, who is Q, and the naughty pupil, who is Bond, who doesn't really want to be there and doesn't really want to listen to anything that Q is telling him.
Anything else?
Well, I won't keep you for more than an hour or so if you give me your undivided attention.
There's a wonderful moment where Q tells Bond that there's an ejector seat. And of course, Sean Connery gives that great line,
"Ejector seat? You're joking."
And Q gives the line back,
I never joke about my work, 007.
So not only have you got the introduction to the great car, you got the introduction to this wonderful relationship between these two characters.
I'd love to be driving that car through the Swiss mountains. I was born in '59, so I was very young at that time, but it just seemed so romantic, didn't it? The thought of jumping in your Aston Martin and heading off and having the number plates that would spin around.
You want to be the hero, don't you? That's why we watch the movies. We want to assimilate with that hero. And I would see Sean Connery driving this car in that movie. You know, it makes the hairs on your arm stand up or the back of your neck. And I still have exactly the same reaction if I see one of these at full chat on a race circuit or on a road. I still get the same reaction I did in seeing Goldfinger for the first time.
Everyone wanted an Aston Martin. Once it was in James Bond, it was indestructible, it was suave, it was beautiful, it was sexy. It's what customers wanted.
The producers of the Bond film wanted that car and nothing but it, because it was quintessentially British. It was a gentlemanly car. It was very much kind of in the same mould as a character of 007.
Discipline, 007. Discipline.
I think what was so smart about combining Bond with a car as classy and cool and understated as the DB5, the same characteristics can be reflected in Bond.
That car at that time in the 60s was everything that Bond should be driving. It was cool, it was suave, it was sophisticated, it was fast, it was British, and it just summed Bond up perfectly.
There's no doubt that, you know, Sean Connery made Bond. He is the iconic image of 007. And the picture of him setting up against the wing on the Furka Pass is a fantastic thing.
That's the thing I think about. That's the shot I think about when I think of Bond. And that speaks Bond to me more than anything from any of the movies.
When you actually see the car in action, you understand how comfortable Bond and the car are together. It's his charisma and the car's charisma and the action from that car that make the scenes really pop and stand out. It just looks fun to drive. I want a smokescreen. I want all of those things. The bulletproof shield, the whole lot, the ejector seat.
One of the greatest moments in cinema history, because you know the second that poor henchman gets into the car next to Bond and they're driving along, that guy is not going to have a very, very good time.
You see him looking at the gear lever, and he presses it and the ejector seat comes up. Every time I see that scene, I still forget that it's coming, and it still makes me smile.
Goldfinger remains one of the major touchstones of the franchise and an enduring favourite amongst 007 fans. The movie represents a perfect mix of the elements that have come to define Bond on screen and would drive the series forward into a thrilling future. As promised during the closing credits of Goldfinger, James Bond would indeed return in Thunderball. The car was back too, at least for a few fleeting appearances.
Not only did Thunderball have my favourite villain of all time, had my favourite pre-title sequence of all time, it came out of the blocks at 100 miles an hour. Bond knocked out a widow that turned out to be a man.
I've come to offer my sincere condolences.
Immediately runs out, escaping from henchmen into a jetpack. Landed perfectly next to the DB5. This was all within 2 or 3 minutes of screen time. It was pretty breathtaking.
No well-dressed man should be without one.
Yes, very practical.
The interesting thing about Thunderball is you don't need to introduce the DB5.
Come at me.
In Goldfinger, you've had to prepare the audience for what it's going to do. But it's there right at the start of Thunderball doing its thing, and the audience is expected to know and accept that it has a bulletproof shield. It can shoot jets of water out. It had penetrated the public consciousness to that point that people accepted it as part of the Bond armoury. Then when you see it later in the film, it's actually used as a piece of misdirection that Bond goes to use the gadgets that by now the audience are expecting. And he doesn't have to, because there's actually a rocket-launching motorcycle that comes out of nowhere and saves him.
Following the huge success of Thunderball, the filmmakers moved on, but decided to park the DB5. In subsequent adventures, as 007 upgraded to new Astons...
Good morning, sir.
...and alternative modes of transport entirely, the car that had become a superstar and a movie icon in its own right found itself back in the garage. It wouldn't be let out again for a Bond film, at least, for another 30 years. And yet the indelible connection between the character and the car would remain.
It's funny how you remember colours as a kid, but I remember this awful mustard carpet that my parents had in the drawing room, and my brother and I sitting cross-legged, just absolutely taken to another place by Bond. And we reenacted it. I mean, my brother still has one of the Corgi DB5s. It's incredible how that just stays with you forever.
So one of the big marketing coups was Corgi getting the license to make their own DB5. They don't actually get it out in time for Goldfinger. They don't know it's going to be a big hit. It comes out in time for Thunderball.
My earliest memories of James Bond will be my Corgi toy of the DB5.
That little model car was the biggest selling item they ever had. I think they did about 20 million of them.
We had the Corgi toy, and the only car that I wouldn't let my friends bash into other cars when they came around to play was the DB5.
The toy itself had so many extra dimensions, didn't it? With all of the ammunition and the bulletproof elements. You could pretend to be James Bond.
for your average 60s kid, that's the closest they're ever going to get to owning a real Bond car. It really does fling out the little plastic henchman that comes with it. It really does have pop-out bumpers.
It's the car that every boy, every girl wants to play with. Everyone wants that toy, and James Bond had it.
My first experience of the DB5 wasn't in the 60s, I wasn't born then. It was in the 80s when I saw Goldfinger. And I didn't realise it then, but it was James Bond's iconic car.
During the Connery era, the films were constantly being released and re-released in cinemas. You know, in the UK, pretty much any day of the week, any time of the year, you could go see a Connery film somewhere in the UK.
And here he comes, the one, the only, 007. And he's got a date with his two deadliest enemies, Goldfinger and Dr. No.
What happened right before Live and Let Die was released is that United Artists looked to TV to try and find a little bit of financial security.
Goldfinger and Dr. No.
Yes, you could go to the cinema to go see Roger Moore, but at home, Sean Connery was on TV, and Sean Connery was driving the Aston Martin DB5.
And then we see it pop up again in, you know, popular culture.
I mean, there was a point where the DB5 just became a shortcut for James Bond, and so you have films where Bond actors were parodying themselves, like Roger Moore in The Cannonball Run or George Lazenby in The Return of the Man from U.N.C.L.E.
The public just know that car means a particular kind of British super spy, whether you can officially name him James Bond or not. That's the archetype.
They were playing iterations of James Bond, and you knew it was that because they were driving the DB5.
In 1995, the world had waited 6 long years for a new Bond adventure. And by the time 007 was ready to return to active duty, it would be in a changed world, both on and off screen, and with a fresh face slipping effortlessly into the lead role. Pierce Brosnan proved perfect for the era, bringing something brand new to the role, while also providing a hint of all the Bonds that had gone before. And it was in the spirit of that blending of contemporary and classic that saw an old friend back on screen for GoldenEye's thrilling post-title action sequence.
What's really interesting about GoldenEye is that even though the producers were introducing a new Bond, and they were introducing him into a new era, the first car we see him in is the Aston Martin DB5. Sure, here we have a new Bond doing new things, but don't forget the fact that he's the coolest spy in the world, and the coolest spy in the world has the coolest car in the world. This is the coolest car in the world.
There's always been a creative remit for Bond to always be looking forward, but to never forget where it's come from. GoldenEye, I think, was the first time they allowed themselves a little cheeky nod to the past, and it felt good.
James, is it really necessary to drive quite so fast?
More often than you'd think.
GoldenEye starts with this really interesting scene where Bond has been assessed by an in-house psychologist.
I enjoy a spirited ride as much as the next girl, but...
So then you have Famke Janssen come along in her Ferrari, Senya on the top.
Who's that?
The next girl.
And the two of them are basically flirting via these cars.
The start of GoldenEye, with the chase between the Ferrari and the Aston, is an almost old versus new battle.
I love the contrast of the cars because you have the DB5, which is classic and elegant and very British. And then you have Xenia coming along in her Ferrari, bright scarlet red.
The juxtaposition between the Aston Martin versus the baddies car is always immediately a visual one. It's always the classic lines of an Aston Martin versus the jagged, angular, brash vulgarity of a Ferrari or a Porsche or some kind of monstrosity that can never come within a million miles of the elegance of an Aston Martin.
It's a really, really fun scene, and Brosnan really sells it. He is having the time of his life.
Pierce Brosnan probably grew up as a Sean Connery fan. That's what every kid wanted to be watching Sean Connery, was that one day they could grow up to be James Bond in an Aston Martin, and Pierce Brosnan was probably the first one to do that.
Following GoldenEye, fans wouldn't need to wait another 30 years to see Bond back behind the wheel of a DB5. And while Daniel Craig brought with him a new kind of 007 and a new kind of 007 movie, there was still an opportunity to pay tribute to the heritage of Bond. Released to huge critical and commercial acclaim in 2006, Casino Royale represented a new beginning for cinema's greatest secret agent. Daniel Craig's opening bow as James Bond provided the perfect opportunity for a fresh approach to the 007 series in the 21st century. But, of course, there was still time to look back while pushing the series forward.
Casino Royale does something really clever where it's always very slyly nodding to the tropes of the Bond series. There's that great scene where he goes to the bar.
Vodka martini.
And the bartender says...
Shaken or stirred?
And he says...
I look like I give a damn.
And I think for me, the DB5 scene is really just another version of that.
It's an entirely new look for Bond. Everything's different, everything's much grittier and down to earth. And if you are watching that as a new fan who's been drawn in by this whole new world of Bond, you don't need to know that that car is significant. It's woven into the plot. Bond wins it in a card game, which ties in with the whole gambling theme.
Trip aces. Aces win.
The fact that it is a DB5 is irrelevant if you're just a newcomer. But for all the fans who were maybe worried, they go, oh, what are they doing with new Bond? It's just a little nod. It's just saying, look, yes, this is still James Bond.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
No wonder he was in such a foul mood.
The DB5 makes a lovely cameo in Casino Royale.
What about a drink at my place?
Your place? Is it close?
Very.
And he's trying to impress Solange in the film, and so there's this lovely gag. Then he just drives around the entrance of the hotel, straight back up to the front again.
Good evening, sir, and welcome back.
Welcome to my home.
But then in comes the modern Bond, in comes the sort of edgy, new, cool Bond, which is the DBS that he drives for the rest of the film.
There was a clear desire to really have a new impact for James Bond. It was a new James Bond in Casino Royale, and therefore it should be a new car, a more assertive car. And DBS fitted the bill perfectly. When Daniel saw it, he said, yeah, that's clearly the car. And we decided to surprise Daniel with the car delivery. So we drove the car over to Prague. There was a dinner arranged, and we said to Daniel, come outside afterwards. We opened the back of the truck and said, here's your new toy. And again, seeing his reaction was just fantastic as well.
It's at the center of the film's best stunt for me, which is that cracking multiple roll.
One of the classic Bond trademarks is destroying beautiful cars. And Casino Royale has one of those classic moments.
He's driving, trying to find Vesper, who's been kidnapped at the end by the evil Le Chiffre. And suddenly there is Vesper in the middle of the road, and he has to swerve to avoid her.
Well, they rolled that car many, many times.
And I remember thinking, you can't do that to an Aston Martin. And yet, that brought it alive all the more.
It's most un-Bond-like to A, crash a car, and B, really, really total a car.
So obviously Casino Royale still has, I think it's still a world record for end-over-end turns.
It's painful to watch, but, you know, you can't look away. You want to see these things put through their paces to the point of destruction. And that's what Casino Royale is all about, is putting Bond through his paces to the point of destruction.
The DB5's brief cameo in Casino Royale paved the way for a starring role in what would turn out to be Bond's biggest blockbuster yet. Released to coincide with the 50th anniversary celebrations of Bond on screen, Skyfall could also boast Oscar-winning talent joining the team on both sides of the camera, with Javier Bardem as 007's main antagonist and director Sam Mendes calling the shots. Not to mention the movie hitting cinemas in the wake of the 2012 Olympics, with a sense of national pride and celebration still very much in the public consciousness.
Skyfall is a landmark Bond movie in many, many ways. It's still the only Bond movie to break $1 billion. It won BAFTAs. And of course, it's a Bond movie that is drenched in a sense of its own history.
It just felt, after 50 years of such a celebration of Britishness, a celebration of Bond, and a celebration of just what makes that legacy so great.
All in all, it was the perfect time for Bond, and a perfect time for Bond's iconic car to hit top gear.
The premiere and the first screenings of Skyfall had with it all the excitement and all the secrecy and all the pomp and glamour of a Star Wars reboot. It was that big, it was huge. And how they managed to keep the DB5's kind of appearance a secret, I don't know, it was like having a cameo from Darth Vader at the end of Rogue One. That's how it felt.
I think that every Bond lover is just waiting for the car reveal.
Well, I'm not hiding in there, if that's your brilliant plan.
We're changing vehicles.
Because you know it's coming, you just don't know when and how.
Trouble with company cars is they have trackers.
Michael G. Wilson, one of the Bond producers, will always recall this wonderful moment in the cast and crew screening of Skyfall. And all these people are Bond experts and Bond aficionados. They're not easily impressed. But that moment, they all cheer.
Oh, and I suppose that's completely inconspicuous.
Get in. When the DB5 appears, there was a great cheer in the cinema. Everybody started clapping.
There was an audible cheer, a gasp, a hey, you know, in the cinema.
I love that M gets to drive in the car with him. And I love the relationship between Bond and M.
It's not very comfortable, is it?
When he flips to reveal the button in the ejector seat and she says,
"Oh, go on then, eject me. See if I care."
I love that. There's a little bit of cheeky humour in that and a callback as well, so you can see it's still souped up and it's still got all the gadgets and gizmos attached to it.
It's the first time that there's an explicit through line from Goldfinger and Thunderball to the modern era, and saying, yes, this is all one crazy ride of the same timeless, ageless spy who has this mad magic car.
It feels like there's a moment where it all comes full circle, because for me, the really iconic scene in Goldfinger with the DB5 is him driving through Switzerland, driving through the mountains, and the contrast between this sort of great object of art that is the car and then this natural, beautiful landscape. And then in Skyfall, you have the sequence where they're driving through Glencoe. It's a similar sensation and a similar contrast. And so it feels like it's Bond sort of going back to the beginning in order to say goodbye.
The metaphor used in Skyfall was poetic, really. James Bond's original car driving James Bond back to his childhood home and then subsequently dying there as well. You know, that it's a beautiful circle of life.
The way Sam Mendes uses the DB5 in Skyfall is really, really interesting. It feels almost like it's a cameo from a big-name actor who shows up in the last third of the movie. The audience loves him, they recognize him, and then he gets bumped off, just to show that nobody is safe.
That car plays a very big part in fending off the villains. It's very integral to that scene. Not so much in an obvious way, but the way it sits outside the house waiting. Almost like a character and waiting to explode, waiting to go off.
Use the DB5 to fend off the attackers. It's actually a part of the scene. It may as well be a person in that scene, in the way that it is one of them barricaded up in the house against swathes of gunmen. The DB5 never looks out of place. Much like James Bond really never looks out of place. and it never has a hair misplaced or a piece of lint on the suit. Nothing is out of the ordinary until it does, unfortunately, get destroyed.
And the significance of him turning the helicopter on the car, he's going, you know, kind of kill it, basically.
There was no need to kill the car. There was a symbolic gesture. He had Bond in his sights. He had M in his sights. He said, no, hang on a second. Helicopter, could you just destroy the thing that Bond holds dearest to his heart, please? And the helicopter did as he did, and Bond was furious.
It's a strange scene because you feel for the car.
I love that the DB5 getting blown up is treated like a death scene. Like, there's a stillness after it explodes.
And that's Bond's no claims bonus just gone. It is gone.
You could be forgiven for thinking that the DB5's brief appearance at the very end of the most recent movie was Daniel Craig riding off into the sunset. But actually, it was far more of a segue into Craig's swan song as James Bond. Because while the DB5 was how we said goodbye to Spectre, it's back. Absolutely front and centre at the start of No Time to Die.
Why would I betray you?
We all have our secrets. We just didn't get to yours yet.
Can't wait to see it. I'm as intrigued about the car as I am about the plot.
Aston Martin have been talking about these 4 cars that represent the past, the present, and the future. I'm excited to see how they connect it all and what those cars say about Bond's journey.
I really want to see how the car really adds to the action in this film because it seems like it's right in the centre of it. Now it feels like we've been introduced and we've seen what it can do and we feel like it's a friend. Now it comes back as an integral part, so I'm pretty excited by that.
We don't know anything about it, and I can't wait to find out. How they've kept the car a secret up till now is a mystery.
You sometimes think, well, where would Aston Martin be without Bond, and where would Bond be without Aston Martin? It's probably the most enduring relationship in film history. I don't think there's any other film franchise that has remained, come back to that original product. I mean, it is a member of the cast, maybe the most important member of the cast.
James Bond films are a cultural touchstone for many, and having an Aston Martin in them is an even bigger cultural touchstone, especially for people like me, people who have been watching racing, people who have been watching cars, people who've had the posters on their walls and the toys in their boxes.
For me, it's the most famous car in the world. It's sort of effortless. It's just cool without trying. I don't think you can say that about many characters or many cars.
There's not really anything else like it where you can just show a production car even without any of the gadgets and people know what it's about. You can just show that car doing nothing and people say, James Bond.
They complement each other so well, and together they create something really quite extraordinary.
Even the name Aston Martin feels like it could be something Fleming made up. Like Aston Martin is almost the name that would have been next on his list. It could have been Martin, Aston Martin instead. The two of them just seem really, really nicely entwined, destined to be together.
It's almost impossible to define the importance of Aston Martin to James Bond, or of James Bond to Aston Martin. Individually, they are classic examples of British design that remain perennial favourites no matter the changing tastes of culture and style. But together, they have created moments and images burned onto cinema screens that will last forever.